The Oakland County Child Killer, a chilling case of unsolved crimes. Are you ready? Let's start from the beginning. Let's agree on one thing. Every crime is horrifying, but the ones involving children are the most gut-wrenching. No matter how hardened a person is, whether a drug dealer, a thief, or even a murderer, there's something about a crying child that can break even the coldest heart. Even criminals behind bars despise those convicted of harming children. These offenders don't last long in prison. They are beaten, tortured, or even killed by other inmates. Now let's dive into today's case, but stay sharp, you'll need to focus. Our story takes place in the United States, in Oakland County, Michigan. On February 15, 1976, a 12-year-old boy named Mark Douglas Stebbins, a 7th grader, went missing. Mark was a small-built, blonde-haired, all-American kid. That afternoon, at 1:30 p.m., he called his mother, telling her he was heading home to watch a movie, but he never made it. His mother waited and waited. By 11 p.m., she panicked and called the police. She described her son's last known appearance: a blue hooded parka, blue jeans, black rubber boots, and a red sweatshirt. The police launched an immediate search, but for 4 long days, there was no sign of Mark. His mother visited the police station every day, pleading for answers. Then on the 5th day, a chilling discovery. At 11:45 a.m., a businessman was walking through a shopping mall parking lot in Southfield, Michigan. He noticed something strange on the ground, a figure in a blue jacket and jeans. At first, he thought it was a mannequin. But as he approached, the horrifying reality hit him. It was Mark's lifeless body. The police arrived and confirmed the worst. Mark had been strangled, but that was just the beginning. Upon further examination, they found evidence of severe abuse. His body bore burn marks, rope marks on his neck and wrists, indicating he had been bound, and worst of all, signs of sexual assault with a foreign object. Mark had suffered unimaginably before his life was taken.
Not a day goes by, where you don't wonder and, worry about it, the whys and the wherefores, how long he had been dead before his body was found, who it was, where he was, what he had to go through. And, yes, I'm still very bitter.
Investigators interviewed numerous witnesses. One man who regularly walked his dog near the parking lot claimed that at 9:30 a.m. that morning, his dog hadn't reacted to anything unusual. If Mark's body had been there, the dog would have noticed. That meant someone had dumped Mark's body in that parking lot between 9:30 and 11:45 a.m. But who? 10 months later, another tragedy struck. On December 22, 1976, a girl named Jill Robinson had a fight with her mother. This girl was 12 years old, a teenager, always angry, and had a lot of trouble. Following an argument with her mother, Carol Robinson, over dinner preparations, allegedly Jill and her mother argued that afternoon about making biscuits. Jill refused to make the biscuits with her mother, and so was subsequently told by Miss Robinson to get out. Following this, Jill hastily packed a backpack with a blanket and cosmetics and left her home in Royal Oak, Michigan. Jill's parents were divorced, and it was known that she and her mother always fought. Her mother was not able to control her, and she typically spent Wednesdays at her father's house. However, on this day, Jill's father, Mr. Tom Robinson, had plans that didn't allow for him to supervise Jill for the day. Jill left the house at 11 p.m. Her mother, Carol Robinson, assumed she had gone to her father's house, but when he called later that night asking about Jill, panic set in. Jill had never arrived.
I haven't seen her since, and I wasn't really very worried for an hour or so because she's very stubborn, and I thought she'll stand in the next yard and think about it and or go around the block or something, and then I thought maybe she went to visit her father.
The next morning, her bicycle was found behind a store near her home. On December 26, 1976, Jill's body was discovered near a highway, not far from Troy Police Department Station. She was fully dressed and lying on her back and was not tied up. Investigators located Jill's backpack and noted that it still contained her personal items. Whatever had caused the murder, robbery was not the motive. When they went and saw the body, they found a large bloodstain under her head. As soon as they lifted it, they discovered that Jill had been shot in the head at close range with a 12-gauge shotgun. The forensic team determined that she had been alive when she was brought to the location where she was killed. It was clear to them, during the autopsy of her body, that there were no signs of sexual assault, and it seemed that she'd been cared for and fed in the time since she went missing. Just a week after Jill's murder, another child went missing. Christine Mihalik, a 10-year-old girl and a 5th-grade student at Pattongill Elementary School. Her parents were divorced and she lived with her mother and younger brothers in Berkeley. She was a quiet and shy girl. Christine was an average student with only a handful of friends. On January 2nd, 1977, Christine went to a local 7-Eleven in Berkeley to buy a teen magazine. It was a short, simple trip, one she had done many times before. But this time, she never returned home. Worried when her daughter didn't return, Christine's mother, Deborah Ascroft, reported her missing, fearing the worst. There were whispers that Christine was another victim of whomever had killed Jill. Ascroft told a news outlet at the time, "People keep talking about the Royal Oak girl, but I'm just not even going to think about that." On January 22nd, 1977, Christine's body was found by mailman making deliveries named Jerome Wozni on a dead-end road about 16 minutes from her home. Christine was fully dressed and lying on her back, with no visible signs of violence or sexual assault. However, the autopsy revealed she had been suffocated, just like Mark Stebbins. The killer had closed her eyes and crossed her arms. He then tucked her in with snow, patting it down and leaving handprints, another bizarre murder scene. Shockingly, the autopsy showed that Christine's kidnapper had killed her less than 24 hours before she was discovered, meaning the killer had held her captive for 18 days. What happened during those 18 days remains a chilling mystery. With 3 young children missing and found murdered in the span of about a year, parents in Oakland County began to fear that their children could be next. At Pattongill Elementary, the school that Christine had attended, children used to walk home, but now most were picked up from school by their parents. Despite the precautions taken by parents in the area, authorities still weren't convinced that there was a serial killer. It would take one more victim for law enforcement to finally acknowledge that a serial killer really existed. Timothy King, an 11-year-old boy who played basketball on his school's team, lived in Birmingham with his parents and siblings, an older sister, and 2 older brothers. Tim was described as outgoing, athletic, and well-liked, and unlike Jill Robinson, there was no doubt that he'd been abducted when he went missing. On the evening of March 16, 1977, Tim borrowed 30 cents from his sister and then went to a local pharmacy to purchase some candy, only 3 blocks away from his home. This wasn't an uncommon occurrence for him, and he'd done it many times before. Why should this time have been any different? It didn't take Tim long to get there on his skateboard, and the clerk recalled selling Tim some candy. The clerk said that he saw Tim walk out of the store around 8:30 p.m. That was the last time anyone saw the boy alive. Around 9 p.m. that night, Tim's parents returned home to see that the front door was ajar and that their son wasn't home. Tim's older sister wasn't home either, as she'd gone elsewhere for the evening, so it wasn't clear how long Tim had been missing for. His parents searched the property and surrounding area, then contacted authorities to report Tim as missing. The Birmingham Police Department took the case seriously, with the police chief at the time stating, "Whatever happened to Tim happened between the time he left the store and before he got home. It doesn't look particularly good at this time." In a TV interview, Barry King, Tim's father, made an emotional appeal to Tim, or whoever had Tim, begging for his son's safe return. "We love him very much, wherever he is and whoever he is with."
Say hi to Tim. We love you, Tim. God bless you. Stay tough. I have one other statement to those persons or person who may be with Tim. I don't know if you have children or if you want to have some, but please treat Tim the same way you would your own kid. Talk to him. He's a talkative kid if you've spent some time with him.
He mentioned that Tim could have Kentucky Fried Chicken when he got home, apparently Tim's favorite meal. On March 23, 1977, 2 teenagers made the gruesome discovery of finding Tim's body in a ditch about 300 feet from a busy road in Livonia. Tim was still wearing the same clothes he'd last been seen in, and his skateboard was nearby, roughly 15 feet from his body. An autopsy revealed that Tim had been fed and taken care of in the time since his disappearance, and his body had been washed before being dumped. The most chilling detail? His stomach contained traces of fried chicken, his favorite meal, which his father had promised him on TV during a desperate plea for his safe return. His cause of death, like two of the other victims, was suffocation. He'd also been sexually assaulted, as Mark Stebbins had been. Finally, after Tim's murder, authorities accepted the idea that a serial killer of children was prowling Oakland County. It should also be stated that Tim was actually the 7th child to go missing in the area over the past year or so, but he is only the 4th confirmed victim. A task force was put together, coined the Oakland County Special Task Force, with the sole goal of identifying and bringing to justice the killer. A woman told authorities that she had seen a boy with a skateboard, like King, talking to a man in the parking lot of the pharmacy that he visited on March 16, 1977. A composite drawing of the suspected kidnapper and his blue AMC gremlin was released, and authorities questioned every gremlin owner in Oakland County. Shortly after King's murder, a person claiming to be the roommate of the Oakland County Child Killer wrote a long letter to a Detroit psychiatrist in 1977. Dr. Bruce Danto shared the letter with investigators. The author of the letter only identified himself as Alan, and he referred to the killer as Frank. Alan alleged they both served in Vietnam, where Frank was traumatized by killing children. He suggested Frank targeted affluent citizens in revenge. Alan expressed remorse, mentioned being suicidal, and offered evidence in exchange for immunity, but never followed through. The task force checked more than 18,000 tips, which resulted in about 24 arrests on unrelated charges and the discovery of a multi-state child pornography ring operating on North Fox Island in Lake Michigan. The task force was unable to make much headway in the investigation, disbanding in December 1978, burning through its $2 million budget and producing no arrests. The open case was handed off to the Michigan State Police. But even though a suspect wasn't caught, the killings appeared to have stopped. Eventually, the hysteria died down. Authorities had several suspects for the Oakland killer, many of whom were either convicted or suspected pedophiles. We shall start with suspect 1, Archibald Edward Sloan. Sloan was living in the Farmington Hills area and working as a mechanic when the 4 children went missing or were murdered. Hairs found in Sloan's 1966 Pontiac car matched hair samples found on 2 of the victims, Timothy King and Mark Stebbins. However, the hairs were not from Sloan himself. It's not clear who the hairs belonged to. Additionally, when the DNA found on the bodies was tested against Sloan's DNA, there wasn't a match. Oakland County prosecutor Paul Walton explained, "It doesn't mean Sloan didn't do it, but whoever those hairs belong to is obviously a person of interest." The fact that some hairs were found on the male victims' bodies that were also found in Sloan's car suggests that he may have been working with the killer, or at least been acquainted with him enough to let the killer borrow the car. How else would the same hairs end up both in Sloan's car and on the bodies of the victims? An Oakland County prosecutor told a news outlet, "Investigators are looking for information concerning any other people who may have used this car or who had access to any of these vehicles." The 81-year-old man was sentenced to life in prison in 1985 on 2 counts of first-degree criminal sexual conduct. The charges were for an assault that took place on October 1st, 1983. Sloan is alive and is still serving that sentence. Suspect 2, Theodore Norman Lamborghini. Arrested in 2006 for involvement in a 1970s Detroit sex ring, Lamborghini was considered a top suspect. He refused a plea deal that required a polygraph test on the case. In 2007, the Stebbins family filed a wrongful death lawsuit against him, claiming he abducted and murdered Mark Stebbins, though he was never formally charged. Lamborghini is still alive and serving his life sentence. Suspect 3, Christopher Bush. He was the son of General Motors executive Harold Lee Bush. According to newspaper reports, Bush was an admitted serial pedophile who told police he fantasized about kidnapping and molesting children. Bush also drove a blue Chevrolet hatchback, which was reportedly similar to the AMC Gremlin that was spotted at one of the abduction scenes. Barry King, one of the confirmed victims' fathers, strongly suspected Bush as being the killer. Chris Bush had been in police custody shortly before King's abduction for suspected involvement in child pornography. In 1977, Bush pleaded guilty to reduced charges of molesting young boys and was sentenced to probation. He allegedly committed suicide in November 1978. There was no gunshot residue found on him, though, and no blood spatter. The entry wound was between his eyes. Furthermore, he was also found wrapped neatly under his sheets. In Bush's room, a drawing of a screaming boy was found that resembled Mark Stebbins, one of the victims in the case. Other evidence recovered from the scene included ropes and a shotgun shell, but that evidence was thrown out by police when they concluded that Bush's death was a suicide, so it could never be tested for DNA evidence. However, the DNA that was recovered from Timothy King's body did not match Bush's DNA, the same way it hadn't matched Sloane's. It doesn't completely rule them out as suspects, but it suggests that someone else had to be involved. In 2012, police said there is zero evidence suggesting Bush was the killer. His DNA does not match the physical evidence investigators have. Suspect 4. Gregory Woodard Green. Green lived in the Detroit area during the time that the 4 confirmed victims went missing. He was later sentenced to life in prison in June 1977 for sexual assault charges against children, which seems to fit in with the crimes committed against the confirmed victims. In 1977, Green told authorities that the Christopher Bush was the one to kill Mark Stebbins. According to news sources, both Green and Bush took and passed polygraph examinations regarding the murders. However, a blog called The Oakland County Child Killer suggests that Green would have been in jail because he couldn't afford to make bond during the time that Timothy King was killed. For this reason, most people don't think that Green was the killer. Green died of a heart attack in prison on December 29, 1995, while watching television in his cell at Thumb Regional Correctional Facility. He was discovered quite some time later because he died with his eyes open. It took a while for inmates and guards to realize he had died. Suspect 5. James Vincent Gunnels. For a time, investigators considered James Gunnels the best lead in the case. He was potentially linked to the murder of Christina Mihelic through mitochondrial DNA evidence. Testing revealed that a hair found on Mihelic's body matched Gunnels' mitochondrial DNA, meaning it could belong to him or a male relative from his mother's side. However, Gunnels denied knowing how his DNA got there, and to this day, he has never been charged. But the story doesn't end there. Gunnels' past adds another layer of complexity to the case. As a child, he was molested by Christopher Bush, a man several of the victims' families believe to be the Oakland County Child Killer. These families suspect that Bush may have manipulated Gunnels, using their troubled relationship to convince him to help lure children. This chilling possibility raises questions about Gunnels' potential role in the crimes and whether he was a victim himself, caught in the web of a much larger predator. Adding to the intrigue is Gunnels' age at the time of the killings. He was only 16 years old. According to police documents, investigators believed Gunnels may have been part of a group involved in the child killings or used as a lure to draw kids closer to the killer. This theory suggests that Gunnels, still a teenager, could have been manipulated into participating in the crimes, further blurring the line between perpetrator and victim in this haunting case. Unlike other potential suspects in the case, Gunnels doesn't have any child sex offenses on his record. Instead, his criminal history includes controlled substance manufacturing, larceny, breaking and entering, unlawfully driving away in an automobile, and even attempted prison escape. That doesn't mean he couldn't have been involved in the child killings, only that he hasn't been caught or convicted for such crimes. In 2012, Gunnels met with the family of victim Timothy King, expressing sympathy but maintaining his innocence. Notably, Gunnels failed a polygraph test during the investigation, further deepening suspicions about his potential involvement. James Vincent Gunnels is alive. According to the Michigan Department of Corrections, he was discharged from their supervision on May 13, 2023. Born on October 12, 1961, Gunnels would be 64 years old as of today. Despite decades of investigation, the fear that gripped Oakland County in the 1970s has never truly faded, and the Oakland County Child Killer was never identified. Furthermore, no suspect is currently named in the case. For the families of the victims, the pain of losing a child was compounded by the lack of answers. Barry King and his wife, parents of the fourth victim, Timothy King, channeled their grief into action. In 1977, they established the Tim King Fund, a non-profit dedicated to providing assistance to abused children and promoting youth activities in Birmingham. Barry King died in 2020 without answers. He had spent decades pursuing the case on his own. As we remember Mark, Jill, Christine, and Timothy, we are reminded of the fragility of innocence and the evil that sometimes walks among us. This case is a chilling reminder that some monsters are never caught, but their stories must never be forgotten. Could the killer still be alive? Did they operate alone? Or were they part of a larger, more sinister ring? As forensic technology advances, perhaps the truth will finally come to light. Until then, the question remains: who was the Oakland County Child Killer? If you found this story chilling, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let's bring more attention to this case and keep these victims' memories alive. Stay safe and always be aware of your surroundings.